Hey, welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at TANGZU's Shimin Lee. So Shimin Lee is the second in the trilogy from TANGZU. This one was the sort of the follow-up to Wan Li, and then there was going to be a third set that is coming out shortly. So before we begin, I do want to thank Keep Hi-Fi for giving me a few dollars off on this one. I essentially got it for the pre-order price after the pre-order period, so thank them for giving me a few dollars off. If you were following along with this set in the sort of pre-order hype, as they were getting ready to release it, you sort of knew that these shells were going to be quite spectacular. And I think in person, as delivered, they probably live up to everything that I thought they were going to be. They feel great in the hand. They're a little weighty. They are a beautiful chromed, whatever the metal is. But yeah, I think they sort of knocked the build quality out of the park and the look of it. I think everything is really top notch here for the $30 price tag. Cable itself, a little springy. It's not too bad. I had put some Velcro on to keep it from springing. It's not too bad though. It's not as soft as I would hope, but not too bad. It's not like a blonde stringy thing. So also, if you were in the market for Shimin Lee, you'll sort of know that some of the initial reviews, there seems to be a little divide here as to whether people like it or don't like it. And for me, I think it really comes down to not so much a like it, don't like it, love or hate. It's more of a good versus not good enough. Did this meet your expectations versus, not quite good enough to compete with other sets that are in that $30 range? So I think, especially if you are new to the hobby, this is your first or second set, and you were really looking for a great value set, $30 to get a great build quality, nice cable, nice accessories, reasonable sound quality. You can pop it in your ears, hit Britney Spears, sounds like Britney Spears. It's got plenty of bass for pop music. I think this one sort of hits that target quite well. The difference between that and someone who has perhaps 5, 6, or 7 IEMs and things to compare to it is, I think that's sort of where their tuning sort of took a diversion from what you would typically find in this price range. So Practophile published a very, very good written review, and he had talked to them prior to his review, and they said they were sort of fans of this diffuse style, edemotic style tuning. So what that really looks like, and maybe where they took their cue from, is sort of this. You can see the edemotic and diffuse style tunings or targets sort of were supposed to be this kind of neutral bass, rise to 3K, and then arc over in sort of a steep angle like that. So what these guys did is they sort of boosted the bass a little bit, and that gives you some of that popular music bass level that actually is sort of a general purpose bass level, not too bad. They do put quite a bit of emphasis on this 3K area. That is definitely quite up there, just about 10, a little more than 10 dB probably. And then it does arc over quite steep, and I think that's where most people are going to have issues. So people who are not used to too many IMs, you have 1 or 2, this doesn't really make that much of a difference. If you have 5, 6, or 7, you're going to notice that this is quite different, and how this affects everything else here is going to be quite different from the other 5 or 7 IEMs that you have to compare with. So yeah, I'm kind of torn. I think if you're new to the hobby, I think this one's actually going to work out quite well. If you have some sets already, this one really goes under the consideration pile of whether you need something that is essentially different in signature from what you have. But just remember that just because it's different, it doesn't mean it's better. It's just sort of different. And how they tuned it is different. So you will have to make up your mind if you're in that sort of latter category of you got a bunch of sets, and whether you're trying to add something to your collection that is a bit different, do take into consideration that won't necessarily, it'll definitely hit the different part. Whether it hits the better part is something that you'll have to decide on your own. So what works on Shimin Lee? It is definitely a more neutral-ish, long session and balanced set with a diffuse style. I'll sort of give them that. I think that kind of works for them and works for the set. But do try both sets of tips and try other sets of tips. And like I said, Practophile actually put out a really good review, and he sort of spent lots of time running through tips. I'm not that patient to run through that many tips, but I actually do like the smaller bore set that are actually included with the way I had this one set up. So, but you will have to play with tips to get a better balance because of, and a lot of it is because of this area right here, just a bit too elevated. So you will need tips that sort of mitigate that elevation for your ears a little bit. But the levels, I would say that they are long session, polite. Like I said, that lower treble peak is kind of up there, but it's sort of non-offensive, not really a bad entry-level set for non-bass heavy genres. Like I said, I think if you're new to the hobby, I think this one's actually going to work out for you. Nice build, nice shells. It looks kind of nice. And I would say this one, there are some sets that, and tuners who tend to be very timbre focused. And it's kind of a weird thing to hear, but it really feels like they spent a lot of time reducing and clamping down, some of the parts that would be offensive to people. A lot of the dynamics and a lot of the, off-timbre excitement has been really clamped down on this guy. And you're sort of focused on, I don't know what they were focused on, probably some instrument, but they sort of got rid of and tamped down everything that makes a set exciting and really focused on making some instrument sound natural. And this one really doesn't step out of place. It's very polite. And like I said, I think it's just going to work for people who don't have many sets because it just sounds about right. It may not sound super exciting to you, but it actually sounds somewhat correct. And like I said, so what doesn't work is this timbre focus without dynamics. It's very unengaging. It lacks that shine and musicality, and it just sounds a little compressed, not compressed in the treble like a cell phone. You get a cell phone and your signal like flakes out. You get that sort of compressed sound to it. It's not like that. It just sounds like more like the dynamic range of it was clipped. And you're just missing all the air and the shine and the sparkle and a lot of those things that you may hear on other sets that are going to be somewhat missing on Shimin Lee. And that's why I said this one will probably work if you only have one or two. If you have 5, 6, or 7 sets, you're going to hear some things that are not quite there. And I think that's what doesn't necessarily work on this set. Probably isn't going to work for reviewers, but people who are new to the hobby, it'll probably work out for you. And I do think they overdampen the driver a bit, and it just sounds a bit dark and weighty and slow, and that effect is just sort of a lacking of resolution. I don't think the driver itself is all that as bad as it sounds with the tuning. I think they could have worked on that, and again, I think this timbre focused really had a negative effect on some of the other bits of it that were sort of not ignored, but put to the side in favor of focusing on that. So mods, I did put out a quick video on just putting if you actually pull off your damper, which is kind of there, and you can kind of see it's sort of not properly placed. I just left a little air gap there on the side, and that will give you a little more life to it, a little more engagement, so a little more gain, a little more engagement to your ears, but it will take you off the intention of the tuning. And so if you were really interested in experiencing this diffuse edemotic style hint at tuning, that will probably take you off of what the intention was of the tuner. So do be aware of that. So bass-wise, it's kind of okay. Not the focus of this set. It's kind of there just to fill in and provide about the right level, and I think it does that. I didn't really mind it. Just don't go looking for details or texture. It's kind of maybe one note and kind of there, and it's kind of soft. It's okay is what I would call it. The mids, and this is sort of that part where I think if you don't have a few sets, the mids kind of sound good in isolation. If you don't have anything to compare it to, Britney Spears sounds like Britney Spears. I think it's kind of passable. Good and natural in isolation is what I said, but Where you'll notice the lack of dynamics and treble is when you really A/B it to another set that has more of a presence in that area. And then this thing comes sort of noticeably dark, is what I would say. And that really ripples through right into your mids because you don't have this upper edge to anything. There isn't really enough treble to have proper edges on notes. Everything is a bit soft. There's no sparkle. There's no air. So everything just sounds kind of odd, sounds different, and not necessarily in a good way. So, and I think that really becomes apparent in the mids when you're listening to people's vocals and words and the articulation and how clear that is. Everything is just a little bit hazy, and that is just the combination of the treble level, that tuning, the driver, the overdampening. There's just a bunch of things that are chipping away at what should have been really nice sounding mids with that signature, just not executed perfectly, and it's sort of noticeable in vocals, really. So if you prefer something closer to Harman, do consider that before purchasing. This is not really Harman. It sounds quite reasonable, but not as detailed or as clear as other sets in that price range. Like I said, if you're A/Bing this to something else, it's going to sound just a little bit hazy, is what I would say. Not quite as clear as it should be. So the treble, that lower treble, it's kind of up there, but really pay attention to the downslope after the treble. And it's really sort of critical. I think it looked pretty good on paper. It kind of looks okay, but you've got this area here which has a lot of presence, and then it really dips down quite a bit. And they probably should have brought this whole thing, slid it up closer to where the target is. I think these valleys do really affect what you're hearing, and not having, a proper overtones through the rest of the treble, through the mids. The whole thing just sounds not quite as solid and as focused as it really should be. So do think about that. And again, the extension, it's sort of there. It's just not dynamic or airy due to that level. So I think they sort of carried this out right, where they didn't roll this off super early. They sort of carried it out enough, but they probably should have slid the response levels up a little bit, so there was just a little bit more presence in addition to the actual extension. But on the other hand, if you're a new guy to the hobby, better than fatigue. Without a doubt, it's better to be a little shy than to be a bit over in this case. And if you're new to the hobby, probably not going to notice this for a couple weeks, that it sounds a little bit dark, or you buy another set. But it's just kind of a little bit on the darker side. But you get a long session set out of it, so that's not all that bad. So stage, kind of the same thing. This lack of upper treble makes it feel a bit small. You don't get a whole lot of separation, and let me talk about that in a second. So stage feels, you get a little bit more depth. You don't really have the width and the height because of the high frequencies. I tend to hear some of the high frequencies farther out, and this sort of a good indication of stage height and width. And on here, when you don't have that, you sort of notice that it's just more centered, more smaller. They should have put those levels back in there. With the mod, it actually helps a little bit with that. But where you really notice it is on the layering, the separation. And it's very hard to have instrument separation and note separation when you don't have that high frequency overtone and hard edge to notes that would really give you the separation that is really missing here. Everything sort of blends together on more complex tracks. On some slower tracks, not so bad, but again, it's just one of those, it's another issue that if you have more than one set, and you'll probably notice it. If this is your first or second set, probably not going to notice it for a while. So yeah, a little bit of a mixed bag on this one. I do understand the divisiveness about it, and but as I said, if this is your first or second set, I think you're going to be okay and enjoy it for quite a while. And then go back and read the reviews and the videos and think about, are you really noticing these things? Are there things that you would like changed? And that's how you would pursue a second set, maybe the third in the trilogy by TANGZU when that one comes out. But for now, enjoy your set. And everyone, I will see you next time. Thank you.